What is the average poor American kid's life like? Are there any TV shows like that? Everybody Hates Chris is a pretty good show that takes place in Chris Rock's childhood. Worth a watch emo. It's pretty funny as well. Not a show, but there's a really good movie called The Florida Project. It's a good representation of kids in poverty in the US. If you're looking for an average representation, Malcolm in the Middle is a good depiction of lower middle-class families. The show is old at this point, but you get the idea. Also, appropriately named, The Middle is another good show kinda depicting what you're talking about. I can't think of any TV shows depicting just blatant poverty, though I'm sure there are documentaries about it. Made on Netflix had me crying because that was the closest depiction to my childhood minus the domestic violence. They show how the cycle continues without an outside intervention. If there was a show that realistically depicted the life of poor Americans, I think it wouldn't be on the air long due to how shocking it would be. For me, we never knew when we were going to have electricity, heat, running water, etc. Utilities were always getting shut off because the bills weren't getting paid. When we had no electricity, we would wash our clothes in the bathtub. My siblings and I lived off of the cheapest hot dogs you could buy. Ramen noodles, canned SpaghettiOs and things like bread with butter. We would put Miracle Whip on bread with no meat and call that a sandwich. I did have gaming systems and a TV. Our parents would pawn the electronics to pay bills if they couldn't afford them, so you never knew when the TV would be gone. There was no guarantee of anything from one day to the next. There was a lot of theft, violence and drug use in our neighborhood. It wasn't uncommon for me to see a family member getting arrested. I saw my parents get arrested before as well. Many of my family members were prone to violence, had served time in prison, and would fight people just for looking at them the wrong way or saying a wrong word. They would resist arrest and fight the police too. On top of dealing with the problems at home, you were targeted by bullies at school who would make fun of you for wearing clothes that were thrifted or purchased from Kmart. You could basically fight, which would then make you a target for teachers and administrators as well, or you could just get used to being isolated and turn inward. I rode public transit to school for a while, but we didn't have robust transit system where I live. I had to wake like 2 hours early just to get to school on time on the public transit routes we had. I could get to school faster by walking as it was only about 2 miles away. The problem was that other students who already had their own cars would throw drinks and cans at me for no reason. They were people who I didn't even know and had no reason to dislike me. Because they're in a car and they see you walking, they think it's funny to throw things at you. Shows like Malcolm in the Middle and Roseanne aren't realistic depictions of the American underclass at all. I can assure you, there's nothing funny about living like that. Season 4 of The Wire. Everybody Hates Chris. Roseanne, The Connors. Hey Arnold. The whole building got together for dinner in the building's kitchen. TV shows do a poor job of showing how poor people live. No pun intended. In Everybody Loves Chris, they talk about how they can't afford luxuries, but they can always afford the essentials. Being poor means having to compromise which bills to pay, sometimes breaking the law and stealing goods, borrowing things knowing you either can't give it back or hoping sympathy from the other person will let you keep it, and learning street smarts. But TV shows want to entertain, not depress. So they're poor people, or just people who want nice clothes but can't afford it and having to deal with rats and a mattress on the floor. Good Times. 1970s Chicago housing projects. Shameless. I noticed somehow a lot of foreigners hold Friends as the standard for what American life is like. But I always point out to them that their lifestyle is pretty uncommon and higher class and point them to Malcolm in the Middle as a more realistic depiction that's also really funny. The Middle and Malcolm in the Middle are two funny shows about average lower income average American family. Malcolm in the Middle if you're white, everybody hates Chris if you're black. Just a quick Google search. Netflix has some shows about it. Other than that, Malcolm in the Middle is a great show, as someone mentioned. Everybody Hates Chris is a pretty good option as well. The PJs. I know it's a comedy cartoon, but it's a great one. Growing up we weren't poor, but like lower middle class. Roseanne was a good show that was close to how we lived. Both my parents were blue collar. It was my mom and stepdad, older sister, myself, and little brother, and sometimes my older brother. But he was often running away or living with friends. We had some nice things, but small house, used cars, nothing too fancy. The Middle. Malcolm in the Middle.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.